and welcome to the Prairie Fibre Witch podcast. This is episode 13 on October 5th, which is a Monday. And I'm Sarah, coming to you from this is my little bit of YouTube, coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, on the Canadian prairies, where I live with my parents. I recently moved back to Alberta after living in Quebec for many years. And so that I could study, basically. I'm doing my Master's of Library Information Studies online, and I'm in my last 10 credits of that, so that's exciting. And this is primarily where I talk about knitting, although I do other crafty things as well, but mostly these days I'm knitting up a storm. So let's get into that. I was gonna record a podcast last week. I usually record when my mom's off golfing, but when she went golfing last week, she took with her one of the things that I was planning on talking about. So I didn't have as many things done last week, so it was going to be pretty light on content. So I just waited a bit, and now I have more to talk about. So let's talk about, the thing that she wore to the golf course, which is which is my most recent finished object. It's the Rebel 2 shawl, which I've showed you a few times. This is a pattern by Lesley and Robinson that I have knit out of some lovely hand-dyed yarns. The light neon speckle yarn is a La Bien Aimée from their Mizuyaki collection. It's Howl and Sophie on their Cashmerino base. And then this lovely bluey purple variegated, which is the second color, is a color by Junkyarn on their smooth sock base. This is the Madame Leota colorway, which I believe is one of her Halloween colorways. And she came out with she's come out with another color, like a not complimentary, but like a neat contrast color for a two-color colorwork, I think cowl pattern called Ectoplasm, which is really a really neat. They look really nice together. Anyway, I'm happy with how these look together, and it is nice and soft and cozy. It blocked out quite nicely. I found the bind off is maybe a little too tight, but I don't feel like redoing it. So it doesn't have the big points that you see if you look at the pattern picture for this shawl, but I'm not too bothered about that. Yeah, so that's this shawl. It likes to kind of curl at the ends. And here, I'll put it on. This is mainly how I wear shawls, is sort of the kerchief style. Well, can you see that all right? No, not that one. Let's see, can I? There we go. So, I mean, it's not huge. It's not tiny. It's a good sort of medium shawl. And yeah, it would be good. It does have a tendency to sort of want to pop up, so it would be a good winter cover up. Although I usually like a bigger shawl for winter, but if maybe chilly fall with a lighter coat. Anyway, so that's this shawl. And I mean, this is a decadent pattern with speckly neons and bright hand-painted yarns that are, with cashmere content. It's definitely a luxury piece. It did only take one skein of each color, so that's a 2 skein shawl. So I mean, if you had some special skeins with good contrast, that would be a good choice. But as like a 2-color brioche, you could use a lot of different kinds of yarns, and like the Retrosaria Mondim yarn, like not the one that's, well, I mean, there's the one that is in that is dyed by La Bien Aimée, which is lovely, but it is a more expensive version. But there's also the like not commercial, the more mass-produced version that comes from Portugal, that is at a more of a mass-produced sock yarn price point. There are some speckly colors in that yarn that you could use if you wanted like a speckle effect. Or, I mean, it would look good just out of 2 solid colors too, right? Or like if you got something with an ombre, like a gradient skein could be interesting for one of the colors, and then just pair that with a solid color. Yeah, so definitely a lot of interesting possibilities in terms of yarn choices. This is 2-color brioche with shaping to create this neat patterning. So this is fairly complicated. I mean, once you're in, I mean, it's not an easy project, and there's definitely points where I had to rip out like a chart's worth of progress to go back and redo it, simply because the chart is like everything has a symbol to it. Sometimes it can be hard to find the point of detail that you need to be paying attention to, that now I'm doing this. But it is possible to sort of like somewhat memorize the chart in terms of like knowing what all the symbols are that you're doing, and like getting used to, because there's like 3 different decreases that you do, and typically 2 different increases. You're either increasing 3 stitches or 8 stitches to make these little, rather, these are like an 8-stitch increase. And then like at the edge of the shawl, you're on every right side row in the primary color, you're doing a 3-stitch increase at either side. So like there are some things that are repeated, and like you do the first chart you don't repeat, but like the middle 2 charts that do the like the main body of the shawl, you repeat, and you can see that you're doing the same sort of main motif over and over again. So it is possible to get used to that one. I'm fairly comfortable working with complicated charts, so I am able to do something like this and watch TV. Although not to say that I didn't make mistakes and have to rip stuff out. But yeah, this is not something I would want to watch something with subtitles with, and definitely not reading and knitting. Although there are, like, it's basically, you do something, you have to pay attention for 1 row, and then the following rows, the following 3 rows, you're kind of just working the brioche for that thing. So it's like 1 sort of shaping row and then some rest rows. So, I mean, if you get into the rhythm of it, there's not as much, like, you get some rest in between, like, interesting activity. So, a fun knit, and I'm debating whether I want to knit her Lesley Ann Robinson's Dandelion Fields pattern, or if I want to do the Seriously Holy pattern by Stephen West. I have a good yarn combination picked out of that. I have like 2 skeins of each color, so to do like a larger shawl like that, and yeah, so I might do that. not going to do that immediately, but because I've got other projects in the works, but something to think about. So, like, mainly what I've been trying to do is work through active projects that I've got going on in preparation for casting on, like, the West Knits mystery shawl that's coming out on Friday. But over this past weekend, like, I'm sort of in the planning stages of starting, like, 2 sweater patterns, one for each of my parents. I don't know that I'll start both of those right away, but at least we've got, I've got plans for those 2 sweaters. So there we go. What else have I finished? Oh, I'm a little scatterbrained today, obviously, and I guess I should talk about what I'm wearing. This is my Stockbridge cardigan, patterned by Ysolda Teague. This is the first version of this sweater that I knit out of Holst Coast, which is a 50% cotton, 50% wool blend. I don't remember what color it is. It's a purple. And I wear the heck out of this sweater. It's very comfortable, and it's warm without being too warm, so I might have to make another, use this yarn again, I think, because it's definitely a sweater that I can throw on in the middle of the summer, or it's warm in the winter. So, okay, more socks that I have finished. These are the toe-up rainbow cake socks that I've shown at least once before, probably twice. And these are using the How I Roll pattern by Mara Catherine Bryner. And I knit these toe up simply because when I was winding the gobstopper ball, I wound it with the stripe sequence in the reverse rainbow order, so I decided to start at the toe and work my way up. And the How I Roll pattern, she gives instructions for how to knit these socks top down or toe up with a number of different toe and heel options. So I opted to go for, can you see it here? The square toe option, and then a toe up, heel flap, and gusset, which fits quite well. Although I was working these on 1.75 millimeter needles, and I forgot that the last time I was working on that size needle, I had increased my stitch count to 72. So these are a 64 stitch sock. I probably should have gone for a 72. It's a little, like, it's noticeable over the instep that it's a little bit stretched, but I'm not going to reknit these. They're done. And you can see that the stripes don't match perfectly. They don't, I'm starting, this one I started the toe at the yellow, this one I'm starting at one of the pinks. And I don't mind. I mean, it's a very rainbowy sock, so they are obviously related, even if they're not twins. And I'm okay with that. The reason I decided to do that was because I'm planning to use all of this skein of yarn. So after finishing these socks, I immediately cast on for another pair because my mom was like, oh my god, I need those socks, I need those socks. So I've cast on a pair for her with some contrasting heels and toes, and I'll show you those in a bit. But yeah, these are very nice. This yarn is from the Yarn Badger, who is a self-striping colorway dyer from the UK, who has very lovely soft pastels, and this colorway is called Rainbow Cake, which is it's a very lovely rainbow color with like neat, so you've got like pink and red and sort of a light purple and a more bluey purple, and then blue and green and yellow and orange. So it's a nice like that's the repeat, right? That's a nice big repeat. Definitely fun to knit. Like with any self-striping, it's nice to see the stripes develop, and that they're not, you know, the biggest stripe is like 5 rounds or something like that. So they're short enough to be easy to get to the next stripe. Yeah, so these will go in my sock pile, which needs to be organized at some point, but yeah, it's kind of mostly just a pile of socks. And I will be sure, I will likely be wearing the heck out of these. Yeah. I've done the one thing, okay, so these are like the Rose City rollers. And one thing that I like to do with the Rose City rollers is I like a little bit more leg on mine. So I usually knit 2 inches before I start the heel. This one I got a little excited about casting off, and so I think I only did about 1.5 inches of leg after doing the heel. But that's fine. Yeah. So that's the only modification I make to this pattern, is that I knit the leg longer than it says in the pattern, just because it gives a little bit more, it allows them to sit up a little bit more higher on the ankle, and it gives you a little bit more like rolly cuff. So I like doing that. Okay, next is, you've seen these a few times too. These are some gift Christmas socks that I have made as part of a care package of 4 to send off to my brother and his partner. I don't know that they watch. If they do, here's your surprise is broken. So I started this package of socks in January with a different Christmas yarn. And I had decided to make 2 pairs of Christmas socks and 2 pairs of plain socks to send to them, and as they wear the same shoe size, they can decide which ones they want. So the idea is being there's 2 pairs for each of them. And that was, I mean, gift knitting is an optional thing. Like, I don't mind. I like knitting for other people. I don't knit for just anyone. I knit for people in my family, and people who want knitting. I don't tend to knit for surprises generally. Like, usually the person knows that it's coming and what I'll be knitting it out of. Mostly I knit socks, so I have the foot measurements of the people that I knit socks for. I have a little spreadsheet that I keep on my phone, so they have those measurements when I need them. And, like, there's no law that says that you have to knit Christmas presents for everyone in your family. And I don't get things done for Christmas time. I usually knit things, and when they're done, the person gets them. And I don't opt to go for like keeping it a surprise, simply because, like, I have to knit when I'm hanging out with my family members, and that's a lot of time to invest in something that you're not sure if the recipient is gonna like or not. So, like, so this weekend, my mom had requested a sweater. I have some sweater quantities that are hers, basically. She picked out the yarn and the color and bought the yarn. And so then I find a pattern that'll work for it, and then she gets to decide whether she wants that or not. And then I make it for her. So I was doing that with my mom this weekend because she really wants a sweater out of this pink yarn that she had bought, I think, last year. And then I was thinking about it, and I, I haven't knit a lot for my dad this past year. I usually make him a number of socks, but I haven't been knitting tons of socks this year. And I do have a couple sweater quantities that I thought he might be interested in. So he picked one out that he liked, and then we looked up some sweater patterns, and so he picked out a sweater for him as well. And I'm not sure if I'll start that right away or not, but it'll be in the next few projects that I do. So, and I know it kind of sounds like, I mean, I have the Westnitz shawl pattern that's gonna be coming out. I was gonna do the Frog and Toad patterns, but those are kind of on pause because I haven't heard anything about the yarn that I ordered yet. So I just sent an email today to inquire about the status of my yarn order. So that's on pause for now. And I mean, I was trying to work down the number of works I had in progress, just to have like a reasonable number, but I guess that's kind of going out the window. I'm gonna start some more things, which means I think there's a couple projects that I've moved into hibernating that I think I might just rip out because I haven't worked on them in a while, and I don't know that I'm that excited for the finished product. Yeah. So, okay, so these are Christmas socks, clearly a Christmas yarn. This is the Regia candy color from their Christmas collection from last year. I don't recall offhand the color number, but I'll put it on the screen. And as always, all details I put in the show notes, which are in the doobly-doo or description box. This particular color was called Linzertorte, which is a kind of, was it Austrian? I think Austrian version of a mincemeat tart is kind of what or a fruitcake. Yeah, this is a Christmas dessert with preserved fruit. So, yeah. And this was a really cool, it reminds me of the like design line Aimée and Carlos colors with this kind of interesting repeat to them. But I think they're just a Regia. I don't think Aimée and Carlos were involved in these. And yeah, so nice Christmas pair of socks. They're a little baggy on the blockers because these blockers are for my size. And yeah, I like a good mass-produced sock yarn like the next person. They make for good hard-wearing socks. And although, I mean, I knit these cuff down. And although I tried to start in the same place, they started a little bit off from each other. But I just knit a little bit more ribbing so that they would be, and did the cuff or the heel in about the same place, and followed that so that they would end in about the same place too. Yeah, I do try to make socks match because usually it's fairly close, and and I don't always have to wind off a lot of yarn to get it to match. I mean, the repeat on that is not very big, whereas like the last pair that I knit, the repeat was like the length of the sock. So that is all that I've finished. And that seems like a lot, but it's been 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks since I talked to you. And like when I have lots of projects going on, I, move along on them, and sometimes it seems like I'm not seeing much progress, and then all of a sudden I have a bunch of things done. So, what else have I been working on? So like I said, I cast on immediately after finishing those rainbow cake socks. I cast on another pair. And I am, again, using the same pattern, although I don't think I'll make these roll top socks. I think I'll put a cuff on these. And I might knit them a bit taller too, depending on how much yarn I use. But I am using this nice contrasting yellow For the toes and heels, I'll decide later whether the cuff will also be contrasting. And this is a yarn that I had picked up at one of my local yarn stores here in Edmonton. This is Scheepjes Metropolis. I have never known how this brand is supposed to be pronounced. And yeah. So like one of the times that I was shopping at one of my local yarn stores, I just picked up a couple balls of, like, these are little 50-gram balls to have on hand for contrasting heels, toes, and cuffs, because my mom likes having contrasting colors. So I picked out some colors that she would like. This is color number 34, which has the label of Alexandria. You can see that. And it's like a lovely egg yolky yellow. So it's a nice soft yellow with little heathered bits of like an orange in there, which just warms it up a bit. And I thought that yellow sat nicely with the stripes of the rainbow cake. So yeah, and they're a similar weight yarn. This rainbow cake is on a fairly fine fingering base, so it knits up nicely on the 1.75. The Metropolis, the Scheepjes Metropolis, is a little bit plumper, but I'm still able to work it on the 1.75 millimeter, which is a US 00. As I've said before, I go back and forth between double points and magic loop, and so these are double points. These are being worked on double points. And yeah, I mean, it's nice to work with hand-dyed yarns, but sometimes if you're just popping in a contrasting heel and toe, and like those are areas where we think of as needing like more reinforcement anyway, it makes sense to have to use a more mass-produced yarn for the heels and toes. Yeah, and I have no qualms about mixing yarns like that. I mean, they're both, this is a merino, this is a merino, I think it's a merino, and they're both superwash treated. They both have a nylon content. Oh, this one might have more nylon to it. And I mean, I think they look really nice together. The heathery quality of this color is kind of similar to the like hand painted variants that you get on the other one. So those will be for my mom. And that's kind of, I mean, I have lots of options for knitting while reading, but I'm working on those most of the time at the moment. And then the other thing that you've seen a few times now, that I will show you again, because I am still working on it, is my Islander sweater by Skeindeer Knits. The first sleeve is done. And the second sleeve is coming along nicely. It's almost done. Let's see. Let's compare them here. So that's like 3/4 done. So I feel like another night or two in front of the TV and I could have this finished. And I've gotten into a nice rhythm with the color work pattern. I have memorized it by this point. It's a nice little geometric pattern, and the yarns that I'm working with, one is a superwash. I don't have the labels with me. The gray is a Dale of Norway Baby Ull, which I believe is discontinued, in this light gray colorway. The number details will be below. And I had bought this yarn when I worked at a yarn store in Montreal a number of years ago. Although I never had a plan for what I was going to make with it. I don't always have a plan when I buy yarn, but when I saw this pattern, I thought it would be a good color and then find a contrast to go with it. And then this tealy blue, dark teal that I'm using is Baa Ram Ewe Pipcolourwork in the color Eccup, and it was a color I had picked up from, again, one of my local yarn stores, the Fibre Nook here in Edmonton. And I had intended it to go with a different yarn. I think the yarn that I used in my osprey sweater, which I finished somewhat recently, but they're actually quite different gauges, those two yarns, and I'm glad that I changed my mind and made up my mind to use it for this pattern, because these are like very well matched in terms of weight, and I think they look great together in this sweater. And because I did use a superwash yarn as one of my colors, I did needle felt my steeks before cutting them open, which was suggested on at a Zoom craft afternoon hosted by the Alberta Yarn Project, who I just got. This is like random tangent time, but I was excited to get an email from them this weekend from the Alberta Yarn Project. They're not planning to, well, from what I gather, they're not planning to continue producing yarns, but they are planning to continue hosting virtual knit afternoons for the foreseeable future, which is really great because it's the first time that I felt that I've found knitters with a similar kind of philosophy and like a similar age group, you know? I've had a hard time. I've been to a few different knit groups here in Edmonton, and while people are welcoming and kind, like it's a bit strange to be the only one in the room who like orders yarn online, or like the only one in the room who's knitting with, you know, wool instead of acrylic, like the only person who goes to yarn stores instead of going to Michael's. So it's nice to find knitters with like, or like to be the only one in the room not working on a like $500 hand-painted sweater. I don't always, like, I do work with hand-painted yarns, but I'm not always working on a sweater that costs that much. Not that there's anything wrong. I mean, no judgment on how much you're spending on your materials. That's your own business. I just like being able to have something in common with the people that I'm knitting with. So this sweater is coming along. It's almost done. It's getting there. It's not super fast, but it's getting there. It'll be done soon. And yeah, like I'm knitting this. I did find that I had to go up. My gauge was a little bit tight on the sleeve, so I actually went up a needle size for the sleeve. It could be that the magic loop, that I knit tighter in magic loop than when I'm just knitting in the round. So, but I'm happy with. I tried it on with the other completed sleeve, and I liked how it fit, and I feel like it'll block out nicely. I might steam block it just to see how it's going, but I'm confident that I'm on the right track. I did have to, I think because my gauge is quite different from Ellie of Skeindeer Knits, like my row gauge compared to my stitch gauge, that I had to change the rate at which I picked up stitches from the sleeve hole. And I actually increased the stitch count by about 20 stitches so that it would not be skin tight on my arms. I've also changed the rate of decrease. I am decreasing every 6 rows instead of every 4. And on the first sleeve, that did make it kind of a little bit wide once I got to the wrist, but rather than take it out and change the rate of decrease, I decided to just do 1 row where I decreased about 10 stitches. So it's a little bit, it'll be a little bit of a puffed cuff. Won't, like, you can see it looks a little bit gathered, but once it's on, and this is stretched out a little bit, it's not that noticeable, and I don't mind a little bit of puff. So that's how that's coming along. And the last thing, I'm gonna show this to you, even though like I'm gonna take it out. This is the yarn that my mom had requested that I start making her a sweater out of. This is Sweet Georgia Yarns BFL plus Silk DK in the colorway Rose Gold, which I have, I think we bought 6 skeins of this, so plenty enough for a sweater. And there's some variation in the skeins, so I do plan to alternate, which I had started doing on this little piece. And this is the start of a petal cardigan by Marie Wallen. But I didn't really like, I mean, one of the things in the pattern, they're not really cables. They're like, they're sort of a different, they're sort of like a cable without a cable needle, but like a different version of that. So they end up being like more like little twists. And I didn't like how that was looking, so I tried it as converting them to actual cables, which I also do without a cable needle, but in a different method. And I just think this yarn isn't suited to working such small cables out of. I'm not into it. I don't think I'm not super excited about it. And this is a pattern that is knit in pieces. If I knit this again, I think I might convert it to be 1 piece, and then split for the sleeves. And knit them separately from there. And my mom saw this and she doesn't really like the look of garter stitch, although like much of this is reverse stockinette, but it has the same, she doesn't like the reverse side of knitting very much, so she didn't like it. So we've opted to go for, we went through what I usually do. I do my searches on Ravelry, and I put into the advanced search feature, I searched for DK weight cardigan with cable. Did I look for with cables? I think I did, because my mom was into this idea of having a cabled sweater. So we browsed through and looked at a bunch of different sweaters, and she found one that she likes. It's the Calligraphy Cardigan by Nora Goggin, which is available as an individual download, or it's a part of a modern daily knitting booklet that they put out a while ago of Nora Goggin designs. And I'll put up a picture around. And it's a top-down design that has this really interesting cabled yoke. The design stops above the full bust line. And though it's a short sleeve sweater in the design, there are many people who made it a long sleeve, and there's one in particular that is out of like a green hand-painted yarn with variegation similar to the level of variegation that this has, and it looks really lovely. So I plan to knit that. I plan to make this yarn into that pattern, and I plan to make it long sleeve with probably a nice border to it, probably some ribbing. And yeah, so that'll be her sweater. Oh, maybe I'll show you, because this is sort of like future knitting. I don't always talk about future knitting, but this is more like imminently future planned knitting. I'll get the other yarn that I was going to use for my dad. Okay. So this is the Ulysse yarn by Durum Natura, which is a French yarn. Made from merinos from Arles, A-R-L-E-S, in Provence. Related to black Portuguese merinos raised in the valley of Alentejo, presumably in Portugal. So that's me translating, that's my rough translation of their little French blurb at the bottom here. So it's a very nice, soft, sort of tweedy yarn, heathery, kind of, in this lovely teal color. And when I was first planning on casting on the Osprey sweater, I had ordered this. It's more of a sport weight yarn. I have worked with Durum Natura yarns before. I made a sweater out of their, what is it? Is it a DK or is it an Aran weight? The Gilead? A nice cabled sweater, pullover, poncho-y kind of thing that I made for my mom. So this will be, I think my dad will really like this yarn. It's very soft. He will love it. And he's picked out this cabled sweater pattern. I can't remember the name of it now. It's by, I think, a Japanese designer. I'll put a little picture of it as well. Very cabled. I mean, it's shown on a female model, but the shaping of it doesn't look like, it looks like sort of a boxy style sweater, and I can knit it to the length that he needs to fit him. And yeah, I mean, I realized when I knit him a sweater a few years ago that basically a sweater quantity that'll make a cardigan or a sweater that would fit me or my mom would also make a sweater that would fit him. So that makes it easy to just be like, oh, hey, do you want a sweater? I have this yarn just hanging around, not doing anything. And so, yeah, I can make him a sweater. So that's his sweater. Now, what have I been reading? Actually, I want to talk about something that we've been watching. And I don't know about you, but like with the state of the world and the news these days, like watching the usual, you know, police procedural or mystery dramas, or like we've been watching Raised by Wolves, which is this sort of space drama, bleak space drama. It's been nice to have a show that's like the opposite of, or like completely different from that. And based on the recommendations of Amy Florence of the Stranded podcast, I suggested we try watching Escape to the Chateau, which is a sort of documentary series. It's not a competition show. It's just sort of a show based on this British couple who bought a French chateau and decided to renovate it to be able to host events and weddings. And yeah, and it's their journey of transforming this space into to be able to use it as a working wedding venue. And to be quite honest, it's fucking delightful to see somebody build something, right? Like, it's not a competition. It's a competition. It's sort of like, it's a competition of against a deadline, right? It's not a competition with other people. There's not prizes involved. It's about building something and like transforming a space. And what I really enjoy is Angel, who has the design vision. She's not just taking details from the castle or from the chateau and like transforming them into a modern version of that. I mean, she is doing that, but she's also retaining elements that are unique to the chateau, to the building, and to like finding details that are in the attic and then finding ways to showcase that in a modern way in the space. So coming up with ideas that are unique to the space itself and to her and her family's enjoyment of the space. And so it's just lovely to watch. And her husband, Dick Stockbridge, is like the engineering guy who has to figure out how to drill through 3-foot stone fortress walls to like figure out a heating system that'll work for the chateau and stuff like that. So it's a very interesting show. And like, so she has the decorator side of things. He likes to cook and do gardening, and it's very interesting to see they have their own particular. It's not something that I would want to do, right? It's not something that I would want to do, but it's neat to see their process, and like some of the things that people in my family like to do, which is how to incorporate fresh ingredients that you grew in your garden to make something special, right? And or like taking a field trip to go get your copper pots relined so that they are usable again and stuff like that. So, not just about buying new stuff all the time, but how to refurbish old things so that they can be useful again. Anyway, I really like the show, and I recommend it if you need something that's just like enjoyable. To be honest, like enjoyable and positive, because I think we need that. Like, not to say that there's not a place for drama or conflict, but sometimes it's nice to have something that's just enjoyable. Yeah. Okay. What else am I reading? I finished The Buried Giant, which I think I talked about. It was kind of sad and melancholy, but kind of beautiful at the same time. I got out of the library this mending book that I think was released recently, and I had a little read through it. I didn't get deep into it. It wasn't really my jam, simply because I like things that come from a basis of like traditional methods of doing stuff, and it seemed a little bit more based on we've been mending in our, like, the authors have been mending in their own experience, and this is what they figured out have been good ways of doing it and good tools to work with. Whereas I kind of go more for the, like, these are traditional methods and traditional styles of doing stuff. So yeah. And I like to have, in an instruction manual, I like to have pictures, and it was all done in illustrations. They were lovely illustrations, and it has a lovely style to it. I would say, like, get it out from your library if they have it. to have a look at it, or have a look at it in a bookstore if you can, to see if you like it or not. And yeah, I wasn't that into it personally. I kind of would, somebody who I follow on Instagram, oh, I'm not sure what her name is actually, but I know her Instagram name is Buku, and she sells project bags and does lots of sort of patchwork piecing. She showed on her Instagram channel, or Instagram page, this traditional method of making a patchwork, like wrapping, like patchwork piece of fabric that then becomes something you use to wrap stuff with, like gifts and stuff like that. It's a Korean tradition, and it was a really neat little hand stitch project. I have enough hand stitch projects on at the moment, but it would be lovely to make something like that at some point. And so, yeah, that I would be interested to see if she does a book on mending. I should look to see if she has something, like a mending book. Because I like that, I like the having the background and the history of, like, what people have traditionally done. That's personally what I like. Not to say that everything has to be done how it's been done for thousands of years. Clearly, the way that I knit is not how people have been knitting for thousands of years. But it's nice to know that history to then evaluate new methods of doing stuff as to whether it's better or not. And with my very little experience of using, like, some traditional, like, hand sewing techniques versus modern hand sewing techniques, like, the traditional ones or the historical ones aren't bad, to be honest. Like, they kind of make sense in a way that, yeah, and, like, are fairly straightforward too. So, something to think about. What else am I reading? I'm also reading this book. Oh, I, like, don't remember the author's name. It's called Too Much, and it's about, like, how the constraints of Victorians are still applicable to our modern society. And it's a very, like, looking at the Victorian literature and Victorian norms, and then looking at modern examples that where these things are reinforced. And the one thing that she does in the first chapter is define this idea of too muchness, that, like, is particularly talking about the experience of women and how women are constrained by Victorian ideals, even still. And so this idea that, like, a woman can be too much or too emotional or too whatever, and how we're still being confined by these ideas. And so she, like, in the examples that she uses in the first chapter relate to Alice in Wonderland, and about how that book is more about how Alice is becoming an adult, and how her body is changing, and that is too much for her reality, and she should really just stay a child forever. Is the reading that is presented. And I have not, like, academically studied Alice in Wonderland, so I read it a long time ago without that critical eye. But it seemed well supported by her evidence. And that this kind of idea that women are just too much, right? Like, too hysterical, and, like, these are, yeah. Anyway, so it's an interesting read, and it goes through different themes, looking at different aspects of too muchness, I guess. And so the chapter, it is more of, like, an academic voice, and this the author talks about her own personal experiences as well, which adds an interesting element to it. So she's more like she's evaluating this idea of too much in relation to her own experiences and her own coming to terms with that, which is an interesting way to look at things, while incorporating examples from contemporary society or contemporary film or stories. And yeah, it's interesting. The chapter that I just read, which was talking about self-harm, which I have difficulty reading about, not because I have a history of self-harm, I don't, but it just, yeah. I just have, like, difficulty reading about that, with a lot of detail. Anyway, I just do. And what else am I reading? Oh, I got out a copy of Elizabeth Zimmerman's Knitting Without Tears. I've never read all of her books. I've read a bit of her books, and I do use, like, her sewn bind off. I use a lot in my knitting when I want, like, a nice clean edge. And so yeah, and I don't think I've read Knitting Without Tears. And it's interesting to see, like, the point that where I am in the book is I'm reading about her ideas of different, like, her suggestions for different techniques, and, like, it's interesting to see how, like, it's so clearly these books were influential in the early internet days of knitting that led to, like, the development of Ravelry. And how these things have become, like, socially understood. Like, in her book, she talks about, she has a preference for what she calls left-handed knitting, which is continental knitting, which she taught herself because she saw a Swiss governess doing, but then her English governess forbade her from doing it, so that only made her want to do it more. So then that became how she knit, and that it's more efficient. I don't personally think that, like, continental knitting, there's this idea that kind of goes around that, like, continental is better than English knitting. I personally do knit with the yarn in my left hand, continental style, and I did kind of teach myself how to do it, and I think I wonder, I can't remember if I looked at a book or not. I can't remember, maybe I did look at Elizabeth Zimmerman's book, because I do purl the way that she suggests. I thought that, well, anyway, I don't remember how I came to that purling technique. I don't remember, there weren't, like, videos at the time that I remember watching. Yeah, I felt like I just figured it out, but who can say at this point, so many years later. Anyway, but it's interesting to see that, like, some of that value judgment that, like, one way is better than another way. But she also does say in her book that the right way is the way that works for you, right? So, and that's kind of what I think. Like, try a bunch of different techniques, find the way that you like, and go with that, and that works for you. Because it really, I think she says in this book in particular, you are the boss of your knitting. You get to make the call, and, like, that's why I think a lot of her patterns are sort of more recipes and less prescriptive of specific stitch gauges or specific stitch counts, because there are so many variations to what you might want to be knitting for different bodies, different shapes, different at different gauges with different yarns. Like, there's so many variables that it's more important that you know the proportions of things than having like a set of instructions. So, yeah. It's nice to revisit her knitting style, because you can just read her books like a book and not necessarily like as a knitting pattern that needs to be done, because her style of writing is more, she has a definite voice, and it's more conversational, right? And sometimes it's just really funny too. So I'm reading that. Anything else that I'm reading? Other than that, I'm reading school stuff, which is maybe less exciting to talk about. Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's about all I have to talk about. Yeah, I cut myself harvesting a celery from the garden this weekend, which goes along with my sprained finger that I'm rough on my middle fingers this past week. I sprained my middle finger putting shoes on, like last Thursday, I think, which is ridiculous. But that's getting better. I can still knit, so, which is the important thing. But yeah, when I first sprained it, I like couldn't lift my teacup with my right hand. Do not recommend. Yeah, so I think I've been playing with my Band-Aid a little bit, but this is why I knit, because I'm a fidgety person otherwise. So thanks for joining me for another episode. Yeah, and I hope you get to knit something, or that you're enjoying what you're making. Yeah. It is definitely fall here. Like, I don't have my, can we see that out the window? I do have blinds. I don't have them on right now. I don't think you can see out the window. Ooh, this is bad. Well, whatever. Yeah, it's definitely fall here. My mom is not golfing today. And yeah. Have a good week. Happy crafting. I hope you're making stuff that you like, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.